The screaming roar of afterburners echoed across the tarmac at Naval Air Station Oceana as Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her helmet one final time. At 26, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her compact frame dwarfed by the massive FA-18 Super Hornet that would carry her into hostile airspace over the contested regions of Eastern Europe. The morning briefing had been tense, filled with intelligence reports about advanced surface-to-air missile systems and enemy fighter patrols that had already claimed 2 Allied aircraft in the past week. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Squadron Commander Jake Morrison watched from the flight line as Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision. Her movements were economical, professional, betraying none of the doubt that gnawed at him every time he sent her up. Chen was technically proficient, he'd give her that, but something about her quiet demeanor and slight build made him question whether she possessed the aggressive instincts necessary for air-to-air combat. She'd graduated from flight school with decent marks, nothing spectacular, and her performance during training exercises had been competent, but unremarkable. "Another milk run for our quiet bird," muttered Lieutenant Commander Rick Torres, Sarah's wingman, as he approached his own aircraft. Torres was everything Sarah wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, confident to the point of arrogance, with a voice that carried across the entire ready room when he told stories about his previous deployments. He'd been flying combat missions for 8 years and had developed the swagger that came with surviving multiple tours in hostile airspace. Sarah said nothing as she strapped into her cockpit, running through the startup sequence with practiced efficiency. The radio chatter filled her helmet as Control Tower coordinated the morning's sorties, but she filtered out everything except the essential communications. Her flight computer displayed the mission parameters. Close air support for a Special Forces team that had been pinned down by enemy artillery for the past 18 hours. Intelligence suggested light air defenses in the target area, routine mission parameters that shouldn't challenge an experienced pilot. What the intelligence reports didn't mention was the presence of a recently deployed S-400 missile system that had been moved into the operational area under cover of darkness. The enemy had learned to adapt their tactics, using mobile air defense platforms that could appear and disappear before Allied reconnaissance could track their movements. Sarah's squadron was flying into a trap that had been carefully prepared by adversaries who understood American air power doctrine better than most American pilots realized. The takeoff was routine, 2 F/A-18s lifting off into gray morning skies that promised weather complications later in the day. Sarah formed up on Torres's wing as they climbed to cruising altitude, their aircraft loaded with precision-guided munitions designed to eliminate the artillery positions that had been harassing the ground team. The flight to the target area would take 43 minutes, enough time for Torres to regale her with commentary about the mission that she'd heard variations of dozens of times before. "Simple in and out," Torres's voice crackled through her headset. "Pop the artillery, provide some close air support for the ground pounders, and we'll be back in time for lunch. These backwater conflicts don't require much finesse, just point and shoot." Sarah acknowledged with standard radio protocol, but privately disagreed with Torres's assessment. Every mission carried risks that textbook scenarios couldn't anticipate, and overconfidence had killed more pilots than enemy action in recent conflicts. She'd studied after-action reports from previous deployments, noting patterns in how seemingly routine missions became disasters when pilots underestimated their adversaries or failed to adapt to changing conditions. The landscape below shifted from coastal plains to mountainous terrain as they approached the operational area. Sarah's radar display showed no air traffic, but she maintained constant scanning protocols that had been drilled into her during countless training exercises. Enemy fighters in this region were typically older Russian aircraft flown by pilots with varying skill levels, but recent intelligence suggested the presence of more advanced platforms that could challenge American air superiority. Her navigation system indicated they were 20 minutes from the target area when Torres's voice cut through the routine radio chatter with sudden urgency. "Vampire! Vampire!" Surface-to-air missiles inbound from our 6 o'clock. The training that had seemed routine suddenly became survival instinct, as Sarah's aircraft system screamed warnings about multiple missile locks. The S-400 system had detected their approach from a range that exceeded the capabilities of older air defense platforms. Its radar had tracked their flight path for several minutes before launching a coordinated salvo designed to overwhelm standard electronic countermeasures. Sarah's threat warning system lit up like a Christmas tree, as multiple missiles approached their formation from angles that made evasive maneuvering extremely difficult. Torres immediately broke left, deploying chaff and flares while attempting to notch the incoming missiles by positioning his aircraft to minimize radar cross-section. His evasive maneuvers were textbook perfect, executed with the confidence of a pilot who'd survived similar situations multiple times. But the enemy had anticipated standard NATO evasive tactics, programming their missiles to counter conventional defensive measures. Sarah's response was different from anything Torres had seen during their previous flights together. Instead of following standard doctrine, she executed a series of unconventional maneuvers that seemed to defy logic. Her aircraft dove toward the terrain at angles that should have been suicidal, using ground clutter and atmospheric conditions to confuse the incoming missiles' guidance systems. The maneuvers were so aggressive that her airframe stressed beyond normal operational limits, but somehow she maintained control while avoiding the missile envelope. Torres wasn't as fortunate. Despite his experience and textbook-perfect evasive actions, one of the advanced missiles managed to track his aircraft through his defensive maneuvers. The explosion that consumed his FA-18 was visible for miles, a fireball that eliminated an experienced pilot and millions of dollars of advanced military hardware in seconds. Sarah watched her wingman die while simultaneously fighting for her own survival against missiles that continued tracking her aircraft with persistent accuracy. Her threat warning system indicated that additional missiles were inbound, launched from secondary positions that had remained hidden until the initial attack was complete. The enemy had prepared a coordinated ambush, using multiple air defense platforms positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would challenge even the most sophisticated aircraft. Sarah realized she was facing adversaries who understood modern air warfare tactics better than intelligence reports had suggested. The second wave of missiles forced her into even more extreme evasive maneuvers. She dove her aircraft to within 100 feet of the mountainous terrain, using valleys and ridgelines to break missile tracking while pushing her engines beyond their designed operational parameters. The stress on her airframe was enormous, warning lights illuminating across her cockpit as various systems approached their limitations. But her unconventional flying kept her alive when conventional tactics would have resulted in certain death. It was during this low-level evasion that the missile fragment struck her aircraft. A proximity detonation from one of the pursuing missiles sent shrapnel through her starboard engine, immediately causing catastrophic failure that filled her cockpit with warning alarms. Hydraulic pressure dropped, electrical systems began failing, and her aircraft transformed from a sophisticated fighter into a barely controllable glider that was rapidly losing altitude. Emergency procedures kicked in as Sarah fought to maintain control of her damaged aircraft. The starboard engine was completely destroyed, flames streaming from the nacelle as she attempted to shut down fuel flow and prevent a complete fire that would force immediate ejection. Her port engine was running, but damage to control systems made normal flight characteristics impossible. She was losing altitude at a rate that would require immediate action to avoid crashing into the mountainous terrain below. Ejection was the obvious choice, the safe option that would preserve her life even if it meant losing millions of dollars of military hardware. But ejecting over hostile territory meant certain capture, and the Special Forces team she'd been sent to support was still pinned down by enemy artillery. Their situation would become desperate without the close air support that only she could provide, assuming she could somehow keep her damaged aircraft operational long enough to complete the mission. The decision to attempt a controlled crash landing was made in seconds, based on calculations that balanced survival probability against mission requirements. Sarah had spotted a relatively flat area about 2 miles from the Special Forces team's position, a clearing that might accommodate her aircraft if she could maintain control during the approach. The landing would be extremely dangerous, but it offered the possibility of survival while keeping her close enough to the ground team to provide assistance. Her approach was a barely controlled descent through mountainous terrain that would have been challenging for an undamaged aircraft. With failing hydraulics and damaged control surfaces, she was essentially flying a guided missile toward the ground, hoping that momentum and gravity could be converted into a survivable landing. Trees flashed past her canopy as she threaded her aircraft between ridgelines, her airspeed bleeding off as she prepared for impact. The crash landing was violent, but survivable. Her FA-18 hit the clearing at over 100 miles per hour, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop against a stand of pine trees that absorbed the final impact energy. Sarah's ejection seat had saved her life, but the aircraft was completely destroyed, flames beginning to spread from the engines toward the cockpit area. She had perhaps 60 seconds to extract herself and any useful equipment before the fire reached her aircraft's remaining fuel and ordnance. Sarah Chen had learned early in her naval aviation career that being underestimated was often more valuable than being respected. At the Naval Academy, her instructors had politely suggested she might be better suited for intelligence work or logistics rather than the demanding world of fighter aviation. Her slight build and reserved demeanor didn't match the stereotype of aggressive pilot personalities that dominated the competitive culture of naval aviation. Even her acceptance into flight school had come with whispered doubts about whether she possessed the physical strength and mental toughness necessary for carrier operations. The doubts had followed her through every phase of training. During basic flight instruction, her scores were consistently above average, but never exceptional enough to draw attention. She flew with mechanical precision, following procedures exactly as written, avoiding the kind of flashy aerobatics that impressed instructors but sometimes led to accidents. Her classmates nicknamed her Ghost because of her tendency to complete missions efficiently while remaining largely invisible to both praise and criticism. Flight school had been where she first encountered the institutional biases that would define her early career. Commander Patricia Hayes, her primary instructor, had been blunt about her concerns during a mid-training evaluation. "Chen, you have excellent technical skills and superior situational awareness, but you lack the killer instinct we need in combat pilots. Flying fighters isn't about following checklists. It's about aggression, quick decisions, and the confidence to push aircraft beyond their design limitations when the mission requires it." Sarah had nodded politely, accepting the criticism without argument, but privately disagreed with her instructor's assessment. She'd studied combat aviation history extensively, noting that the most successful pilots weren't necessarily the most aggressive ones. They were the ones who understood their aircraft, their environment, and their enemies well enough to make the right decisions under extreme pressure. Aggression without understanding was often indistinguishable from stupidity, and stupid pilots died quickly in combat environments. Her assignment to VFA 103 Jolly Rogers at Naval Air Station Oceana had been considered routine, another competent but unremarkable pilot-filling squadron requirements. The Jolly Rogers were an experienced squadron with a proud history, but they weren't considered one of the Navy's elite units. Squadron Commander Morrison had reviewed her file with the same mild interest he showed for most new pilots, noting her adequate scores and lack of disciplinary issues without particular enthusiasm. The squadron's culture was dominated by pilots like Torres, who'd earned their reputations through aggressive flying and colorful stories from previous deployments. They occupied the ready room with confident chatter about air-to-air engagements and close air support missions that had tested their skills under fire. Sarah listened to these conversations without participating, absorbing tactical knowledge while remaining on the periphery of squadron social dynamics. Her first few months with the squadron had reinforced everyone's initial impressions. She flew her assigned missions competently, completed her training requirements on schedule, and avoided the kind of incidents that marked some pilots as either exceptional or problematic. Her flight records showed consistent performance within acceptable parameters, the kind of steady professionalism that kept squadrons operational but rarely generated legends. What her squadron mates didn't know was that Sarah spent her off-duty time studying aspects of military operations that went far beyond standard pilot training. She'd become fascinated with special operations tactics during her academy years, reading extensively about unconventional warfare and the integration of air and ground operations. Her personal library included technical manuals about weapon systems, communications equipment, and survival techniques that most pilots never encountered. The fascination had begun during a guest lecture by a retired Green Beret colonel who'd spoken about the evolution of close air support in counterinsurgency operations. He'd described scenarios where pilots had been forced to operate outside their normal roles, providing not just air support, but direct assistance to ground teams in ways that traditional training didn't address. Sarah had been intrigued by the complexity of these operations and had begun studying them in detail. Her academic interest had evolved into practical preparation during her time at Oceana. She'd quietly arranged to attend some of the base's cross-training exercises, learning basic infantry tactics and weapons handling that weren't part of standard pilot curricula. Most of her squadron mates spent their free time at the officers' club or participating in recreational activities. Sarah spent hers at the base's small arms range, learning to operate weapon systems that pilots might encounter in survival situations. The training had been informal and largely self-directed. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, who ran the base's survival training program, had taken an interest in her unusual requests for additional instruction. Rodriguez was a former Special Forces operator who transitioned to training duties after a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. He'd been initially skeptical about training a pilot in ground combat techniques, but Sarah's serious approach and quick learning had impressed him. Most pilots think survival training is about hiding until rescue arrives, Rodriguez had told her during one of their sessions. But modern conflicts don't always allow for traditional search and rescue operations. Sometimes survival means being able to fight your way to friendly forces or provide direct assistance to ground teams. The pilots who understand this live longer than the ones who don't. Under Rodriguez's guidance, Sarah had learned to operate various small arms with competence that surprised even her instructor. She'd mastered the M4 carbine, the M249 squad automatic weapon, and various foreign weapons systems that American forces might encounter in coalition operations. Her marksmanship was excellent, but more importantly, she'd learned tactical movement, communication procedures, and the kind of situational awareness that kept ground troops alive in hostile environments. The training had remained Sarah's private interest, something she pursued without advertising to her squadron mates. Military culture often viewed such cross-training with suspicion, interpreting it as either lack of confidence in one's primary role or excessive ambition that might disrupt unit cohesion. Sarah had no desire to become a ground combat specialist. She simply believed that modern military operations required broader competencies than traditional training provided. Her philosophy had been shaped by studying historical examples of pilots who'd been forced to operate outside their normal roles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. During World War II, fighter pilots had frequently found themselves supporting ground operations in ways that went far beyond providing air cover. In more recent conflicts, downed pilots had sometimes become valuable assets to special operations teams, providing expertise and capabilities that enhanced mission effectiveness, rather than simply creating rescue requirements. Lieutenant Commander Jennifer Walsh, the squadron's operations officer, had been one of the few people to notice Sarah's unusual interests. Walsh was an experienced pilot herself, having completed multiple combat deployments before transitioning to staff duties. She'd observed Sarah's extra training with curiosity rather than criticism, recognizing dedication when she saw it. Chen's an interesting case, Walsh had mentioned to Commander Morrison during one of their regular personnel reviews. Her flight performance is solid, but she's spending a lot of time on supplementary training that most pilots don't bother with. Survival skills, weapons training, tactical communications. Either she's preparing for situations she hopes never to encounter, or she knows something the rest of us don't. Morrison had filed the observation without much concern. Pilots who took extra training were generally preferable to those who did the minimum required, regardless of their motivations. Sarah's additional skills hadn't interfered with her squadron duties, and her flight performance remained within acceptable standards. As long as she continued meeting her primary responsibilities, her extracurricular interests were her own business. The deployment to Eastern Europe had come with little advance warning, part of a rapid response to escalating tensions that threatened to destabilize the region. Sarah's squadron had been tasked with providing close air support for special operations forces conducting reconnaissance and direct action missions in contested areas. The enemy possessed sophisticated air defense systems and modern fighter aircraft, creating a threat environment that would challenge even experienced pilots. Sarah had approached the deployment with the same methodical preparation she brought to all her duties. She'd studied intelligence reports about enemy capabilities, memorized terrain features in the operational area, and reviewed tactics that had proven effective in similar conflicts. Her squadron mates had prepared with equal professionalism, but their focus remained on traditional air-to-air and air-to-ground combat scenarios. The pre-deployment briefings had emphasized the importance of supporting special forces teams operating with minimal backup in hostile territory. These teams often worked far from conventional forces, depending on air support for both offensive capabilities and emergency extraction when missions went wrong. The pilots would need to operate in close coordination with ground personnel, providing precision strikes while avoiding fratricide in complex tactical situations. Sarah had paid particular attention to the communications protocols and emergency procedures that would govern interaction with Special Forces teams. She'd memorized call signs, frequency allocations, and authentication codes that would allow rapid coordination during high-stress situations. Most importantly, she'd studied the capabilities and limitations of the ground teams she might be supporting, understanding how air assets could best complement their operational requirements. The morning of her final mission had begun like dozens of others during the deployment. Sarah had attended the standard briefing, reviewed weather conditions and threat assessments, and completed her pre-flight inspection with routine efficiency. The mission parameters seemed straightforward. Provide close air support for a Special Forces team that had been conducting surveillance of enemy artillery positions. Intelligence suggested light air defenses and minimal enemy air activity, making it a relatively low-risk operation. What intelligence hadn't detected was the presence of advanced missile systems that had been moved into the area specifically to target NATO air assets. The enemy had learned to exploit gaps in Allied reconnaissance, using mobile platforms that could establish air defense coverage without being detected by satellite or electronic surveillance. Sarah's mission was flying directly into a carefully prepared ambush that would test every skill she'd acquired during her unconventional training. As her FA-18 had lifted off from the carrier deck that morning, Sarah couldn't have known that within hours she would be fighting for survival on the ground, armed with weapons she'd learned to use during informal training sessions that most of her squadron mates had considered unnecessary. The quiet professional who'd been underestimated throughout her career was about to discover that all her preparation had been leading to this moment, when expertise nobody recognized would determine whether American forces succeeded or failed in their mission. The crash landing had destroyed her aircraft, but it had also placed her exactly where she needed to be to make a difference in ways that conventional pilot training had never envisioned. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who'd prepared for scenarios that everyone else considered impossible. The flames spreading from her destroyed FA-18 created an urgent timeline that demanded immediate action. Sarah unstrapped herself from the ejection seat with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through emergency procedures that had been drilled into muscle memory during countless training sessions. The acrid smell of burning fuel and melting composites filled her nostrils as she gathered essential survival equipment from the cockpit before the fire could reach the aircraft's remaining ordnance. Her survival radio crackled to life as she extracted herself from the wreckage, picking up encrypted communications from the Special Forces team she'd been sent to support. The voices were tense, professional, reporting their situation with the clipped efficiency of operators under fire. They were pinned down by enemy artillery approximately 2 miles northeast of her position, taking casualties while attempting to maintain their surveillance mission against overwhelming odds. Ghost Rider 2-1. Ghost Rider 2-1. This is Viper 6. The radio transmission was clear despite the stress in the speaker's voice. We observed your bird going down. What's your status? Can you make it to extraction point, Charlie? Sarah keyed her radio while moving away from her burning aircraft, already calculating distances and terrain features between her position and the Special Forces team. Extraction Point Charlie was 8 miles southeast, requiring her to cross open terrain that would expose her to enemy patrols searching for downed aircrew. The safest course would be to evade toward the extraction site and wait for combat search and rescue assets to retrieve her. Viper 6, this is Ghost Rider 2-1, she replied, using call signs that identified her as the surviving pilot from the 2 aircraft formation. Aircraft destroyed, pilot uninjured, current position approximately 2 clicks southwest of your location. I can reach extraction point, Charlie, but what's your tactical situation? The response painted a grim picture of a 12-man Special Forces team surrounded by enemy forces that outnumbered them significantly. Their mission had been compromised when local civilians had reported their presence to enemy commanders, leading to a coordinated response that included artillery, mechanized infantry, and air defense assets. The team was trapped in a defensive position with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect for reinforcement. We're in deep trouble, Ghost Rider, came the honest assessment from the team leader. Lost 3 KIA, 4 WIA. Enemy has us bracketed with artillery, and they're preparing to assault our position. We need immediate close air support or medical evacuation, preferably both. Can you contact higher headquarters and expedite support? Sarah checked her survival radio's capabilities while considering the tactical situation. Her emergency communications could reach higher headquarters, but requesting support would take time that the ground team clearly didn't have. Enemy forces would likely assault their position within hours, and standard military response procedures couldn't deliver assistance quickly enough to affect the outcome. The Special Forces team needed help immediately, not promises of eventual support. Her decision to move toward the ground team rather than the extraction point violated standard survival protocols that emphasized pilot preservation over mission continuation. Downed aircrew were supposed to evade enemy forces and await rescue, not insert themselves into ground combat situations for which they hadn't been trained. But Sarah's unconventional preparation had given her capabilities that most pilots didn't possess, and the situation demanded someone willing to exceed normal expectations. The terrain between her crash site and the Special Forces position was mountainous and heavily forested, offering concealment but making rapid movement difficult. Sarah had studied topographical maps during her mission planning, memorizing features that might become relevant if emergency situations arose. The knowledge proved invaluable as she planned a route that would avoid likely enemy patrol areas while positioning her to assist the besieged team. Her survival kit contained standard pilot emergency equipment, signaling devices, medical supplies, water purification tablets, and a compact M9 pistol with limited ammunition. The equipment was designed to sustain a pilot until rescue arrived, not to enable participation in sustained ground combat. Sarah realized she would need to acquire more substantial weapons and equipment if she intended to provide meaningful assistance to the ground team. The movement toward the Special Forces position required techniques Rodriguez had taught her during their informal training sessions. Sarah applied camouflage to her flight suit using mud and vegetation, moving through the forest with the deliberate patience that kept ground troops alive in hostile territory. Every sound, every movement was evaluated for potential threats as she navigated terrain that could conceal enemy patrols or observation posts. 2 hours into her movement, Sarah encountered the first sign of enemy activity. Voices speaking in accented English echoed through the forest, indicating a patrol searching for her crashed aircraft or attempting to locate the Special Forces team. She remained motionless for 20 minutes, concealed beneath fallen logs and dense undergrowth, as armed men passed within 30 meters of her position. Their equipment and tactics suggested professional military training rather than irregular militia forces. The patrol's movement patterns revealed something concerning about enemy capabilities. They were using sophisticated communication equipment and coordinated search techniques that indicated command and control far superior to what intelligence assessments had suggested. The enemy forces in this region weren't disorganized insurgents, but well-trained military units with modern equipment and professional leadership. The Special Forces team was facing adversaries who could match their tactical proficiency. After the patrol passed, Sarah continued her movement toward the sound of distant gunfire that marked the Special Forces team's position. The intensity of the engagement was increasing, suggesting that enemy forces were preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm the defenders through superior numbers and firepower. Radio communications indicated that the team's ammunition was running low and their wounded needed immediate medical attention that couldn't be provided under current conditions. Her approach to the team's defensive perimeter required careful coordination to avoid being mistaken for an enemy infiltrator. Sarah used authentication codes she'd memorized during pre-mission briefing, identifying herself through encrypted radio communications before moving into visual range of the defenders. The Special Forces operators were expecting a downed pilot seeking rescue, not someone prepared to join their defensive efforts. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, the team's senior non-commissioned officer, met Sarah at the perimeter with obvious surprise. Thompson was a veteran of multiple combat deployments, his weathered face bearing scars from previous encounters with explosive devices and enemy fire. He'd been expecting to provide security for a pilot awaiting evacuation, not to receive someone who appeared ready to contribute to their tactical situation. "Ma'am, we've got a secure position where you can wait for extraction," Thompson said, gesturing toward a protected area behind their main defensive line. "CSAR assets are being tasked to retrieve you as soon as we can establish a secure landing zone. Should be here within 6 to 8 hours if we can hold our current position." Sarah studied the team's tactical situation while Thompson spoke, noting details that revealed how desperate their circumstances had become. Ammunition supplies were critically low, with several team members reduced to single magazines for their primary weapons. 3 bodies lay covered near the command post, while 4 wounded operators required medical attention that exceeded their field capabilities. The defensive position was well chosen but couldn't withstand a determined assault by superior numbers. "Sergeant Thompson, what's your current ammunition status?" Sarah asked, using terminology that surprised the experienced non-commissioned officer. Most pilots wouldn't think to ask about ground combat logistics, focusing instead on their own extraction requirements. Thompson's expression shifted as he realized this pilot possessed knowledge that went beyond standard aviation training. Running low across the board, ma'am. Maybe 30 minutes of sustained combat before we're down to pistols and harsh language. Why do you ask? Sarah gestured toward the enemy positions that were visible through gaps in the forest canopy. Because they're massing for a final assault, and 6 to 8 hours is longer than your ammunition will last. What weapon systems do you have available for someone with infantry training? The question caught Thompson completely off guard. Naval aviators weren't supposed to possess infantry training, and they certainly weren't expected to volunteer for ground combat roles. Sarah's request violated every assumption about pilot capabilities and responsibilities that had guided his interactions with aircrew during 15 years of special operations service. Ma'am, with respect, this isn't your fight, Thompson replied carefully. Our job is to keep you safe until extraction arrives. Ground combat is what we do, air support is what you do, and right now, we need you to stay alive so you can coordinate any air assets that might become available. But Sarah had already spotted something that changed the tactical equation significantly. Near the team's command post lay an HK416 assault rifle, its distinctive profile marking it as one of the most sophisticated small arms in the American military inventory. The weapon belonged to one of the team's casualties, a green beret whose personal equipment represented capabilities that could substantially enhance their defensive efforts if properly utilized. The HK416 was far superior to the standard M4 carbines that equipped most military units. Its advanced engineering provided enhanced accuracy, reliability, and modularity that made it ideal for special operations requirements. More importantly, Sarah had trained extensively with similar weapon systems during her unofficial preparation, learning to exploit capabilities that most operators never fully utilized. Captain David Martinez, the team leader, approached their position as enemy artillery began falling closer to their defensive perimeter. Martinez was an experienced officer whose calm demeanor concealed the stress of commanding a team facing overwhelming odds. He'd been coordinating with higher headquarters, attempting to arrange support that might arrive in time to affect the battle's outcome. "Pilot, we've got good news and bad news," Martinez announced with grim humor. "Good news is that air support is being tasked to assist us. Bad news is that the earliest arrival time is 4 hours, and enemy forces are preparing to assault our position within the next hour. We need to discuss fallback positions and extraction alternatives." Sarah pointed toward the HK416 while formulating a proposal that would either enhance their defensive capabilities or demonstrate the foolishness of involving aircrew in ground combat operations. "Captain, what if I told you that pilot survival training included advanced weapons proficiency? Would you consider allowing me to take that rifle and contribute to your defensive efforts?" Martinez stared at her with the incredulity of an officer accustomed to protecting aircrew rather than accepting their assistance in combat situations. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but ground combat isn't something you learn during pilot training. This isn't a video game or a training exercise. These are professional soldiers trying to kill us, and inexperience gets people killed faster than anything else." The condescension in Martinez's voice was understandable, but misplaced. Sarah had spent months training with Rodriguez, learning not just weapons handling, but tactical movement, situational awareness, and the mental discipline necessary for sustained combat. Her preparation had been specifically focused on scenarios where pilots might need to operate outside their normal roles, providing capabilities that could enhance mission effectiveness rather than simply creating additional liabilities. "Captain, I understand your concerns," Sarah replied with a professional courtesy that military hierarchy demanded. "But I've trained extensively with weapons systems, including the HK416. I'm not asking to lead an assault or make tactical decisions. I'm offering to provide additional firepower from a defensive position where my inexperience won't endanger your team." Enemy artillery strikes were getting closer, sending shrapnel and debris through the forest canopy as opposing forces bracketed the Special Forces position. The sound of approaching vehicles suggested that mechanized infantry was moving to support the anticipated ground assault. Time was running out for decisions that might influence whether any of them survived the next few hours. Thompson exchanged glances with Martinez, both officers weighing the risks of accepting assistance from someone whose combat capabilities were unknown against the certainty that their current ammunition supplies wouldn't sustain a prolonged defense. Standard operating procedures discouraged involving aircrew in ground combat, but standard procedures assumed normal circumstances that clearly didn't apply to their current situation. "What kind of weapons training are we talking about?" Martinez asked, his skepticism beginning to shift toward cautious interest. "Basic familiarization or something more substantial?" Sarah's response was matter-of-fact, delivered without the bravado that often accompanied exaggerated claims about personal capabilities. 6 months of intensive training with Master Sergeant Rodriguez at Oceana. Small arms proficiency with M4, M249, HK416, and various foreign weapons systems. Tactical movement, communication procedures, and basic infantry tactics. Not enough to make me special forces, but sufficient to contribute to a defensive engagement. The mention of Rodriguez's name changed everything. Martinez and Thompson both knew the former Green Beret's reputation for training excellence and his intolerance for anything less than professional competence. If Rodriguez had trained this pilot in infantry tactics, her capabilities were probably substantial, regardless of her primary military specialty. "Rodriguez trained you personally?" Thompson asked with new respect in his voice. "That crazy bastard doesn't waste time on people who can't meet his standards. If he certified you on weapons systems, you probably know more about small arms than half the regular army." Martinez nodded slowly, beginning to see possibilities that hadn't existed moments earlier. An additional rifle in their defensive line might make the difference between survival and annihilation, particularly if the operator possessed genuine competence rather than just enthusiastic amateurism. The HK416 was a precision instrument that could provide significant tactical advantages if properly employed. "Here's the deal," Martinez decided after calculating risks that included both action and inaction. "You can take the rifle and position yourself in our secondary defensive line. Follow Thompson's instructions exactly, communicate any problems immediately, and don't take any heroic chances that might compromise our position. Can you handle those parameters?" Sarah nodded, understanding that she was being offered an opportunity that could either validate her unconventional preparation or expose its limitations under actual combat conditions. The trust Martinez was extending represented a significant departure from standard military protocols, based entirely on Rodriguez's reputation and her own claims about training that couldn't be verified under current circumstances. The HK416 felt familiar in her hands as she conducted a functions check that impressed even Thompson with its professionalism. Sarah's movements were economical and confident, demonstrating muscle memory that came only from extensive practice with the weapon system. She checked the ammunition load, verified the optical sight settings, and tested the selector switch with the automatic precision of someone who understood the rifle's capabilities intimately. "Damn," Thompson muttered admiringly. "Rodriguez really did train you properly. Most pilots I've worked with couldn't find the safety on an M4, much less conduct a proper functions check on an HK416. The weapon was configured exactly as Rodriguez had taught her to prefer. Selective fire capability, advanced optical sight, forward grip for enhanced control, and extended magazine containing 30 rounds of match-grade ammunition. The setup represented special operations preferences for accuracy and reliability over the lighter configurations that regular infantry units typically employed. Every component had been selected to maximize combat effectiveness under the most demanding conditions. Sarah positioned herself in the secondary defensive line as Martinez had instructed, choosing a location that provided excellent fields of fire while remaining protected from direct enemy observation. The position allowed her to support the primary defensive line without interfering with the team's established tactics, providing additional firepower that could influence the battle's outcome without disrupting proven procedures. Enemy forces were clearly visible through her optical sight as they prepared for their assault. Sarah counted at least 40 opposing soldiers, equipped with modern weapons and supported by armored vehicles that would challenge the team's limited anti-armor capabilities. The enemy's tactical deployment suggested professional military training and sufficient confidence to attempt a direct assault against entrenched Special Forces operators. Contact front. The call echoed across the defensive position as enemy forces began their attack with suppressive fire from multiple directions. The intensity of incoming rounds forced defenders to seek cover while attempting to maintain effective return fire. Sarah's position in the secondary line gave her opportunities to engage targets that the primary defenders couldn't reach due to their need for immediate protection. Her first shots were carefully aimed at enemy soldiers attempting to flank the main defensive position. The HK416's accuracy allowed precise engagement at ranges that challenged standard infantry weapons, providing interdiction fires that disrupted enemy tactical movement. Sarah's training with Rodriguez had emphasized marksmanship fundamentals that remain valid regardless of stress levels or tactical complexity. The enemy's response to effective fire from an unexpected position revealed their tactical sophistication. Instead of continuing predetermined assault plans, they adapted their approach to account for defensive capabilities they hadn't anticipated. Additional suppressive fire was directed towards Sarah's position, while other elements attempted to identify and eliminate the source of accurate long-range engagement. "Good shooting!" Thompson called from the primary defensive line, as Sarah's fire disrupted an enemy flanking movement that could have compromised their entire position. "Keep those bastards honest while we deal with the frontal assault." The sustained engagement tested every aspect of Sarah's training in ways that static range practice couldn't duplicate. Moving targets, return fire, ammunition management, and tactical communication all demanded simultaneous attention while maintaining the accuracy necessary to influence the battle's outcome. The stress was enormous, but Rodriguez's training had prepared her for exactly these conditions. Enemy artillery began targeting their position with increased accuracy, forcing periodic displacement to avoid concentrated fires that could eliminate individual fighting positions. Sarah moved with the tactical awareness Rodriguez had drilled into her, relocating between covered positions while maintaining observation of enemy movements that threatened the team's defensive integrity. The battle continued for over an hour, with enemy forces making repeated attempts to overrun positions that were defended by increasingly desperate Special Forces operators. Ammunition supplies continued dwindling as defenders engaged targets at ranges that demanded precise shot placement to achieve effective results. Sarah's contribution was becoming more significant as other team members' ammunition approached exhaustion. During a brief lull in the fighting, Martinez approached Sarah's position with an expression that combined admiration with disbelief. "I don't know where you learned to shoot like that, but you've probably saved our asses twice in the last hour. Enemy forces keep trying to flank us, and your interdiction fire is the only thing keeping them honest." Sarah reloaded her rifle while scanning for new threats, her movements automatic after months of training that had emphasized tactical efficiency under stress. Rodriguez always said that accurate fire from unexpected positions could multiply defensive effectiveness. The enemy planned for your capabilities, not for additional precision weapons in their flanking routes. The validation of her training came with sobering awareness of how precarious their situation remained. Enemy forces were regrouping for another assault, this time with better understanding of defensive capabilities they needed to overcome. The next attack would be more focused, more determined, and probably successful unless something changed the tactical equation in favor of the defenders. As if summoned by her thoughts, the distant sound of rotary wing aircraft echoed through the mountains, announcing the arrival of support that might tip the balance toward survival. But enemy forces could hear the approaching helicopters too, and their response would determine whether rescue became reality or simply another tactical complication in an increasingly desperate situation. The approaching helicopters represented either salvation or catastrophe, depending on whether they could establish control of the landing zone before enemy forces overwhelmed the Special Forces position. Sarah watched through her optical sight as opposing soldiers repositioned their weapons to engage the incoming aircraft, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether any of them survived to see another sunrise. Captain Martinez's voice cut through the intensifying gunfire as he coordinated with the inbound rescue force. "Dustoff 7-2, this is Viper 6. Landing zone is hot. Repeat, landing zone is hot. Enemy forces approximately company strength, with small arms and possible anti-aircraft capabilities. We need immediate suppression of eastern and northern approaches." The lead helicopter pilot's response carried the controlled tension of someone flying into a tactical situation that had already claimed multiple aircraft. "Viper 6, Dustoff 7-2. We copy hot LZ. Have 2 Apaches providing escort with full ordnance load. Marking your position with smoke now, prepare for immediate extraction of wounded personnel. Sarah could see the enemy's tactical response developing as they attempted to establish fields of fire that would interdict helicopter operations while maintaining pressure on the ground team. Several shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles appeared among enemy positions, weapons that could destroy the rescue helicopters if properly employed. The tactical situation was becoming a race between extraction capabilities and enemy attempts to prevent their successful employment. The first Apache attack helicopter appeared over the ridgeline like an avenging angel, its 30mm chain gun immediately engaging enemy positions with devastating accuracy. The sound of the weapon was distinctive, a mechanical roar that sent high-explosive rounds into concentrations of enemy soldiers who'd exposed themselves while preparing to assault the Special Forces position. Secondary explosions suggested that ammunition and equipment were being destroyed, along with personnel. But enemy forces had prepared for helicopter interference, positioning air defense weapons in concealed locations that provided overlapping coverage of the extraction zone. A surface-to-air missile streaked toward the lead Apache, forcing the pilot into evasive maneuvers that temporarily reduced his ability to provide close air support. The enemy had studied American tactical procedures and developed countermeasures that threatened to neutralize the technological advantages that usually favored rescue operations. Sarah recognized the tactical opportunity that was developing as enemy forces focused their attention on engaging the helicopters. Their concentration on air defense had created gaps in the ground assault that could be exploited by defenders with sufficient situational awareness and tactical initiative. The HK416 in her hands was perfectly suited for precision engagement of high-value targets who'd expose themselves while operating anti-aircraft systems. Her first target was an enemy soldier, attempting to reload a shoulder-fired missile system from a position that provided excellent coverage of the helicopter approach route. The range was challenging, nearly 400 meters through mountain air that created optical distortions, but Rodriguez's training had prepared her for exactly this type of precision shooting under combat conditions. Sarah's shot struck the enemy operator center mass, eliminating both the immediate threat and the expensive missile system he'd been preparing to employ. The second target presented itself as enemy forces attempted to reposition a crew-served machine gun that had been providing suppressive fire against the Special Forces position. Sarah's training had emphasized the importance of eliminating weapons that could influence tactical situations beyond their immediate vicinity. The machine gun represented a significant threat to both ground personnel and aircraft operations, making it a priority target that justified the ammunition expenditure required for long-range engagement. Sarah's shooting attracted attention from both friendly and enemy forces. Thompson's voice carried admiration and disbelief as he observed her precision engagement of targets that most infantry soldiers couldn't effectively engage with standard weapons. "Holy shit, ma'am. Where did you learn to shoot like that? You just took out their primary air defense position with 2 shots." Enemy forces began directing concentrated fire towards Sarah's position as they realized that accurate shooting from an unexpected location was disrupting their tactical plans. The volume of incoming rounds forced her to relocate, using movement techniques Rodriguez had drilled into her during their training sessions. The ability to change positions while maintaining tactical effectiveness was one of the most difficult skills for ground combat personnel to master, but Sarah's aviation background had provided spatial awareness that translated well to three-dimensional tactical thinking. The extraction helicopter was approaching the landing zone under covering fire from both Apache escorts, but enemy forces were making determined efforts to prevent successful evacuation of the Special Forces team. More anti-aircraft missiles appeared among enemy positions, weapons that represented serious threats to rotary-wing aircraft operating in confined terrain where evasive maneuvering was limited by geographical constraints. Martinez was coordinating the evacuation while maintaining defensive fires that kept enemy forces from overrunning their position during the vulnerable period, when personnel would be exposed while moving to the helicopter. All Viper elements, prepare for extraction. Wounded personnel first, then essential equipment, then remaining personnel by teams. Dustoff 7-2 will have wounded ready for immediate loading in 60 seconds. Sarah realized that her role in the evacuation sequence hadn't been clearly defined. As the rescued pilot, she would normally be among the first personnel extracted, ensuring that valuable aircrew didn't remain exposed to unnecessary risks. But her contribution to the defensive effort had been significant enough that her early departure might compromise the team's ability to maintain their position during the extraction process. The tactical dilemma was resolved when enemy forces launched a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the defenders during the critical period when helicopters were most vulnerable to ground fire. Sarah found herself engaging multiple targets as enemy soldiers attempted to advance through positions she was covering with her precision rifle. The HK416's capabilities were being pushed to their limits as she provided interdiction fires that prevented enemy breakthrough while friendly personnel prepared for evacuation. Her ammunition supply was becoming a critical factor as the engagement continued. Sarah had started the battle with several full magazines, but sustained combat had reduced her available rounds to less than 90 rounds total. Each shot had to count, requiring target prioritization that balanced immediate threats against ammunition conservation. Rodriguez's training had emphasized the mathematics of combat logistics, ensuring that soldiers understood the relationship between ammunition expenditure and mission duration. The first wounded Special Forces operators were being loaded onto the extraction helicopter when enemy artillery began targeting the landing zone with increased accuracy. The combination of direct fire from advancing infantry and indirect fire from supporting artillery created a tactical situation that threatened to prevent successful evacuation of remaining personnel. Sarah's position allowed her to observe enemy forward observers who were directing artillery fires, providing opportunities for precision engagement that could disrupt enemy fire support. Her shot at the forward observer required compensation for wind, elevation, and target movement across terrain that provided limited visibility windows. The range exceeded 400 meters, challenging even for specialized sniper weapons, but the HK416's accuracy capabilities made the shot possible for someone with sufficient training and steady nerves. Sarah's bullet struck the enemy observer as he was transmitting coordinates, eliminating a critical link in the fire support chain that had been threatening helicopter operations. The immediate effect was a reduction in artillery accuracy as enemy forces lost their primary means of adjusting fires against the extraction zone. Thompson noticed the change immediately, recognizing that someone had disrupted enemy fire support procedures in ways that significantly improved their tactical situation. Outstanding shooting. Whoever took out their forward observer just bought us the time we need to complete this extraction. Enemy infantry continued their assault despite the loss of accurate artillery support, advancing with the determination of soldiers who understood that preventing American evacuation would represent a significant tactical victory. Sarah engaged multiple targets as they attempted to overrun positions that were being abandoned as personnel moved toward the helicopter. Her fields of fire overlapped with those of the remaining defenders, creating interlocking coverage that channeled enemy advances into areas where they could be effectively engaged. The Apache helicopters were providing continuous close air support, their weapons systems eliminating enemy vehicles and personnel concentrations that threatened the ground team. But sophisticated air defense systems were beginning to take their toll on American aircraft, with one Apache sustaining damage from a missile that forced it to withdraw from the immediate combat area. The tactical balance was shifting as enemy forces adapted to American capabilities while exploiting their numerical superiority. Martinez appeared at Sarah's position as the evacuation continued, his expression reflecting both admiration and concern about her continued exposure to enemy fire. "Ma'am, you need to get on the next helicopter out. Your shooting has been incredible, but you're not supposed to be here fighting this battle. My job is to get you home safely, and that means getting you extracted while we still can." Sarah understood the captain's position, but she also recognized that her departure would create a gap in defensive fires that might allow enemy breakthrough during the critical final phase of evacuation. The remaining Special Forces operators were preparing to leapfrog toward the helicopter in bounds that would expose them to concentrated enemy fire. Her precision engagement capabilities could provide overwatch that might prevent casualties during the most vulnerable part of their withdrawal. "Captain, I understand your concerns, but my position provides the best overwatch for your withdrawal route," Sarah replied while engaging another enemy soldier who was attempting to establish a firing position that would threaten evacuating personnel. "Give me 2 more minutes to cover your people, then I'll move to the helicopter with the last group." Martinez hesitated, weighing pilot safety against tactical necessity, understanding that Sarah's shooting had already prevented casualties that would have occurred without her intervention. Her request for additional time was tactically sound, even if it violated standard procedures for handling rescued aircrew. 2 minutes, he agreed reluctantly. Then you move with Thompson's group whether the situation is resolved or not. The final phase of evacuation tested every aspect of Sarah's training, as enemy forces made desperate attempts to prevent American withdrawal. She engaged targets at ranges that pushed her marksmanship skills to their limits, providing covering fire that allowed Special Forces operators to move toward the helicopter without sustaining additional casualties. The HK416's accuracy was crucial for precision shots that eliminated specific threats without endangering friendly personnel who were maneuvering in close proximity to enemy positions. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted when Thompson appeared beside her position, preparing to move toward the helicopter as part of the final evacuation group. Time to go, ma'am. Outstanding work, but now we need to get you out of here before the enemy realizes how few of us are left. Sarah conducted a final functions check on her rifle as they prepared to move, ensuring that the weapon was properly safed and prepared for transport. The HK416 had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, providing accuracy and reliability that had been crucial for her contribution to the defensive effort. Rodriguez would be proud to know that his training had been effectively applied under actual combat conditions. The movement toward the helicopter required tactical techniques that balanced speed with security, crossing terrain that remained exposed to enemy observation and fire. Sarah applied lessons Rodriguez had taught about movement under fire, using available cover while maintaining situational awareness that allowed rapid response to emerging threats. The distance was only 200 meters, but it represented the most dangerous part of her entire experience since the aircraft crash. Enemy forces recognized that the evacuation was nearing completion and made final attempts to inflict casualties on departing American personnel. Sarah found herself engaging targets while moving, using techniques that required splitting attention between marksmanship and tactical movement. The complexity was enormous, but her aviation background had developed multitasking abilities that translated well to ground combat requirements. The helicopter's crew chief was directing personnel loading as Sarah and Thompson reached the aircraft, his professional efficiency ensuring that evacuation procedures continued despite incoming enemy fire. Move it, move it. We need to be airborne in 30 seconds or we're going to have serious problems with enemy fire support. Sarah was among the last personnel to board the extraction helicopter, taking a position near the door where she could continue providing suppressive fire during the aircraft's departure. The HK416 remained ready for immediate use as the helicopter lifted off, climbing rapidly to escape the engagement area, while Apache escorts provided covering fire against remaining enemy positions. The flight back to friendly territory provided time for reflection on events that had challenged every assumption about pilot capabilities and responsibilities. Sarah had participated in sustained ground combat using skills that most aviators never developed, providing tactical contributions that had influenced the mission's successful outcome. Her unconventional preparation had proven its value under circumstances that validated Rodriguez's philosophy about expanded military competencies. Captain Martinez approached her as medical personnel attended to wounded team members, his expression reflecting gratitude and professional respect. Ma'am, I don't know how to properly thank you for what you did back there. Your shooting probably saved half my team, and your tactical awareness was as good as any Green Beret I've worked with. Where exactly did you learn those skills? Sarah's response was characteristically modest, crediting her training while avoiding the kind of self-promotion that military culture often viewed with suspicion. Master Sergeant Rodriguez believed that modern conflicts require broader competencies than traditional training provides. He taught me that survival sometimes means being able to fight rather than just evade until rescue arrives. The debriefing process that followed their return to friendly forces revealed the full scope of what had occurred during the engagement. Sarah's precision shooting had eliminated 12 enemy personnel, including forward observers and air defense operators, whose destruction had been crucial for successful helicopter operations. Her tactical contributions had exceeded those of many infantry soldiers with significantly more ground combat experience. Word of the engagement spread rapidly through military channels, generating interest from special operations commanders who recognized the implications of having aircrew with advanced ground combat capabilities. Sarah's performance challenged conventional wisdom about pilot training and raised questions about whether similar cross-training might enhance overall military effectiveness in complex operational environments. General Patricia Wade, the theater air commander, personally conducted Sarah's operational debrief, seeking to understand how a naval aviator had acquired ground combat skills that exceeded standard infantry capabilities. Wade was an experienced officer who'd commanded air operations in multiple conflicts, but she'd never encountered a pilot whose ground combat performance had been tactically significant. "Lieutenant Chen, your actions during this engagement were extraordinary by any measure," General Wade began. "But I need to understand how you acquired capabilities that aren't part of standard pilot training. Your marksmanship scores indicate expert-level proficiency with weapons that most aviators never encounter." Sarah explained her training with Rodriguez, emphasizing the voluntary nature of her additional preparation and the theoretical basis for cross-training that might enhance pilot survival in complex operational environments. She was careful to present her actions as logical extensions of standard survival training rather than departures from established aviation doctrine. "General, modern conflicts often blur traditional boundaries between air and ground operations," Sarah explained. Master Sergeant Rodriguez believed that pilots who understood ground combat fundamentals would be better prepared to support special operations teams and more likely to survive if forced to operate in hostile territory. Wade nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the validity of Rodriguez's philosophy while considering the broader implications for pilot training programs. Sarah's performance suggested that selected aircrew might benefit from enhanced ground combat preparation, particularly those assigned to support special operations forces in contested environments. The formal recognition of Sarah's contributions came in the form of a Bronze Star Medal with V device, acknowledging her valor under fire and tactical contributions that had exceeded normal expectations for rescued aircrew. The citation specifically mentioned her precision marksmanship and tactical awareness that had been crucial for mission success and personnel survival. But perhaps more meaningful was the informal recognition from the Special Forces operators she'd fought alongside. Thompson and Martinez both recommended her for inclusion in future joint training exercises, acknowledging that her capabilities represented valuable assets for integrated air-ground operations. Their endorsement carried significant weight within special operations communities that rarely extended such recognition to personnel from other military specialties. The broader impact of Sarah's actions extended beyond individual recognition to influence training policies that affected pilot preparation throughout the military. Her performance demonstrated that aircrew with enhanced ground combat capabilities could provide tactical contributions that went far beyond traditional pilot roles, particularly in complex environments where conventional boundaries between specialties became irrelevant. Rodriguez, when he learned of Sarah's performance, expressed satisfaction that his training philosophy had been validated under actual combat conditions. "I always told her that expertise couldn't be confined by job descriptions or traditional expectations," he commented to colleagues at Oceana. "Modern warfare requires people who understand that survival sometimes means exceeding normal role limitations." Sarah's return to squadron duties was accompanied by new responsibilities that reflected her proven capabilities. She was assigned to develop cross-training programs that would provide other pilots with basic ground combat skills, ensuring that future aircrew would be better prepared for scenarios where traditional pilot training might prove insufficient. The program she developed emphasized practical skills that complemented existing survival training, basic marksmanship, tactical movement, communication procedures, and situational awareness techniques that could enhance pilot effectiveness in ground environments. The training was voluntary, designed for aircrew who might operate in support of special operations forces or in contested areas where traditional rescue procedures might not be available. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, who'd noticed Sarah's unconventional interests years earlier, was appointed to oversee the expanded training program. "Chen always seemed to be preparing for situations that might never occur," Walsh observed. "Turns out she was preparing for exactly the situation that did occur, and her preparation made all the difference." The success of Sarah's cross-training program led to its adoption by other military services, creating standardized curricula that provided aircrew with enhanced ground combat capabilities. The training didn't attempt to make pilots into infantry soldiers, but it did ensure that they possessed skills that could contribute to mission success if circumstances required them to operate outside traditional aviation roles. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah's experience challenged institutional assumptions about military specialization that had limited creative approaches to training and capability development. Her performance demonstrated that individual initiative and unconventional preparation could create tactical advantages that exceeded the sum of traditional military specialties. The distant mountains where Sarah had crashed her FA-18 and picked up an HK416 to fight alongside Special Forces operators became part of military folklore, representing the kind of adaptability and cross-functional competence that modern conflicts demanded. Her story was studied in military schools as an example of how individual preparation and institutional flexibility could combine to achieve mission success under seemingly impossible circumstances. Years later, when asked about her motivations for pursuing unconventional training, Sarah's response reflected the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her entire military career. Rodriguez taught me that expertise meant being prepared for whatever mission required, not just what your job description specified. Sometimes the most important contributions come from people who prepared for scenarios that everyone else considered impossible. The lesson extended far beyond military applications to influence how organizations approached training and capability development in complex, unpredictable environments. Sarah's experience proved that excellence often emerged from individuals who refused to accept conventional limitations on their potential contributions, preparing themselves for challenges that others couldn't imagine. The HK416 she'd carried during the engagement was eventually returned to the Special Forces unit, but not before being examined by weapons specialists who wanted to understand how standard equipment had been employed so effectively by someone with unconventional training. The rifle showed signs of expert maintenance and employment that reflected both Rodriguez's teaching and Sarah's dedicated application of his lessons. Thompson, now promoted to Master Sergeant, kept the empty magazines from Sarah's rifle as personal reminders of the engagement that had challenged his assumptions about pilot capabilities. She changed how I think about what people can accomplish when they refuse to accept limitations that everyone else takes for granted, he reflected. Sometimes the most important expertise comes from the most unexpected places. Martinez, advanced to major and commanding his own Special Forces team, incorporated lessons from the engagement into his unit's training program, emphasizing the importance of recognizing capabilities that might exist outside traditional military specialties. Chen taught us that excellence can appear anywhere, in anyone, if we're smart enough to recognize it and humble enough to accept help from unexpected sources. The legacy of Sarah's actions continued to influence military thinking long after the immediate tactical situation had been resolved. Her performance became a case study in adaptability, cross-training effectiveness, and the importance of individual initiative in complex operational environments. Most importantly, it demonstrated that legends weren't created by conventional paths or traditional expectations, but by people who prepared themselves to exceed normal limitations when circumstances demanded exceptional performance. As Sarah returned to routine squadron duties, she carried with her the satisfaction of having proven that expertise couldn't be contained by regulations or conventional thinking. She'd transformed from an underestimated pilot into a respected warrior, not through dramatic gestures or self-promotion, but through quiet competence and dedicated preparation that had prepared her for the moment when everything depended on capabilities that no one expected her to possess. The mountain winds that had challenged her aircraft navigation and complicated her ground combat operations continued to blow through the contested regions where Special Forces teams operated with reduced air support. But now those teams knew that American aircrew possessed capabilities that went beyond traditional pilot training, creating tactical possibilities that had been previously unimaginable. Sometimes the most important victories were achieved by people who refused to accept that their potential contributions were limited by other people's expectations. Sarah Chen had proven that excellence emerged from preparation, dedication, and the courage to exceed conventional boundaries when mission success depended on extraordinary performance. Her story became inspiration for others who understood that true professionalism meant being ready for whatever challenges emerged, regardless of whether those challenges fit traditional job descriptions or institutional expectations. The investigation into Sarah's extraordinary performance began within hours of her return to Naval Air Station Oceana, conducted by a joint team of aviation specialists, special operations analysts, and training development officers who sought to understand how a routine pilot had achieved tactical results that exceeded conventional expectations. The inquiry wasn't punitive but rather exploratory, designed to determine whether Sarah's capabilities represented an anomaly or indicated broader possibilities for enhanced aircrew training. Colonel Robert Hayes, the lead investigator, was a career aviation officer who'd commanded fighter squadrons in 3 separate conflicts without encountering aircrew who'd contributed significantly to ground combat operations. His initial skepticism about Sarah's reported performance gradually transformed into professional curiosity as he reviewed video footage, witness statements, and tactical analyses that confirmed the accuracy of initial reports about her ground combat effectiveness. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Sarah had engaged 12 enemy personnel with precision rifle fire at ranges exceeding 400 meters, eliminated critical air defense assets that had threatened helicopter operations, and provided tactical overwatch that had been crucial for successful evacuation of wounded Special Forces operators. Her marksmanship scores during the engagement had exceeded those achieved by many infantry soldiers with years of ground combat experience. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was summoned to provide testimony about Sarah's unofficial training program, explaining the philosophy and methodology that had prepared her for scenarios that standard pilot training didn't address. Rodriguez's reputation for training excellence was well established throughout the military, lending credibility to his assessment of Sarah's capabilities and the theoretical foundation for enhanced aircrew preparation. Colonel Hayes, Lieutenant Chen approached me 3 years ago requesting additional training that went beyond standard pilot survival requirements, Rodriguez explained during his formal testimony. She wanted to understand ground combat fundamentals, not because she intended to change military specialties, but because she believed modern conflicts might require pilots to operate outside traditional aviation roles. The training program Rodriguez described was comprehensive and demanding, involving hundreds of hours of instruction in weapons handling, tactical movement, communication procedures, and combat decision-making under stress. Sarah had voluntarily participated in training that most military personnel would consider excessive for someone whose primary duties involved flying sophisticated aircraft rather than engaging in direct ground combat. Her motivation was purely professional, Rodriguez continued. She studied historical examples of pilots who'd been forced to operate in ground environments and concluded that enhanced preparation might improve survival rates and mission effectiveness. Her dedication to training was exceptional, and her retention of complex tactical concepts was superior to many students with infantry backgrounds. The investigation revealed that Sarah's interest in cross-training had been noted by several officers throughout her career, but none had recognized the potential tactical significance of her additional preparation. Her quiet approach to skill development had kept her enhanced capabilities invisible until circumstances required their employment under actual combat conditions. Lieutenant Commander Walsh provided testimony about Sarah's consistent pattern of exceeding normal training requirements while maintaining exemplary performance in her primary aviation duties. Chen always seemed to be preparing for challenges that might never materialize, Walsh testified. She studied subjects that weren't required, practiced skills that weren't tested, and maintained proficiency levels that exceeded squadron standards. Her additional training never interfered with her flight duties, but it clearly prepared her for situations that standard pilot training doesn't address. The tactical analysis of Sarah's ground combat performance was conducted by special operations experts who examined her decision-making, target prioritization, and ammunition management under combat stress. The assessment concluded that her tactical awareness and combat effectiveness had been comparable to experienced infantry soldiers, despite her lack of formal ground combat training through military schools. Major General Patricia Stone, the commanding officer responsible for pilot training policy, personally reviewed the investigation findings while considering their implications for future aircrew preparation programs. Stone was an experienced aviator who understood both the importance of specialization and the potential benefits of cross-training that enhanced overall military effectiveness. The Chen case presents fascinating questions about the balance between specialized expertise and broad competencies, General Stone observed during a briefing to senior aviation commanders. Her performance suggests that selected aircrew might benefit from enhanced ground combat training, particularly those assigned to support special operations forces in contested environments where traditional pilot roles might prove insufficient. The investigation's conclusions led to the establishment of a pilot program designed to evaluate the effectiveness of enhanced survival training that included substantial ground combat components. Sarah was appointed as the primary instructor, working with Rodriguez and other specialists to develop curricula that would provide interested aircrew with capabilities similar to those she demonstrated during her ground combat engagement. The Enhanced Survival Training Program, as it became officially designated, was voluntary and selective, targeting pilots who might operate in support of Special Operations Forces or in contested areas where conventional rescue procedures might not be available. The training was demanding, requiring participants to master skills that complemented their aviation expertise without detracting from their primary duties as aircrew. The first class of 12 pilots began training 6 months after Sarah's return from the combat zone, representing volunteers from various aviation specialties who sought to enhance their capabilities beyond standard requirements. The students included experienced combat pilots, newer aviators seeking additional preparation, and instructors who wanted to understand the training methodology that had produced such remarkable results. Captain Michael Torres, a senior instructor pilot with extensive combat experience, was among the first students to complete the enhanced training program. Torres had initially been skeptical about the value of ground combat preparation for aircrew, but his attitude changed as he experienced the comprehensive nature of Rodriguez's training methodology. "I've been flying combat missions for 12 years, and I thought I understood everything about pilot survival," Torres admitted after completing the weapons training portion of the program. "But Rodriguez and Chen showed me tactical concepts that I'd never considered. The training doesn't make us infantry soldiers, but it definitely makes us more capable of contributing to mission success if circumstances require ground operations." The success of the initial training program led to its expansion throughout the naval aviation community, with similar programs being adopted by the Air Force and Army aviation units. Sarah found herself traveling between military installations, conducting training seminars, and developing standardized curricula that could be implemented across different aviation specialties. Her reputation within the special operations community continued to grow as word of her combat performance spread through informal networks that connected elite units across military services. Special Forces, Rangers, and other specialized units began requesting her participation in joint training exercises, recognizing that her unique combination of aviation and ground combat expertise could enhance their operational capabilities. Colonel Martinez, now commanding a Special Forces group, personally requested Sarah's participation in a major training exercise that simulated complex scenarios requiring close coordination between air and ground forces. The exercise was designed to test innovative tactical concepts that pushed traditional boundaries between military specialties. "Lieutenant Chen's performance during our previous engagement changed how we think about aircrew capabilities," Martinez explained to exercise planners. Her ability to transition seamlessly from pilot to ground combatant created tactical possibilities that we'd never considered. "We want to explore how similar cross-training might enhance overall operational effectiveness." The exercise scenarios placed pilots in situations where they might be required to operate on the ground while maintaining their primary responsibilities for air support coordination. Sarah's performance during these exercises validated the training methodology and demonstrated practical applications for enhanced aircrew capabilities in complex operational environments. The training program's success attracted attention from international military organizations seeking to enhance their own aircrew preparation. NATO allies requested information about the Enhanced Survival Training Program, leading to collaborative development of training standards that could be implemented across alliance structures. Sarah was selected to represent American military training at international conferences, where aviation specialists shared innovative approaches to aircrew preparation. Her presentations emphasized the importance of individual initiative and institutional flexibility in developing capabilities that exceeded traditional specialty boundaries. The recognition of her contributions extended beyond military aviation to influence broader discussions about professional development and cross-training in complex organizations. Business schools began studying her case as an example of how individual preparation and institutional support could combine to achieve exceptional performance under challenging circumstances. Dr. Amanda Foster, a leadership professor at the Naval War College, incorporated Sarah's experience into curricula that examined adaptability and innovation in professional military education. Lieutenant Chen's story illustrates fundamental principles about expertise development and organizational effectiveness. Dr. Foster explained to her students, "Her success resulted from personal initiative, dedicated preparation, and institutional recognition of unconventional capabilities." The academic interest in Sarah's experience led to research studies that examined the broader implications of cross-training for military effectiveness. The studies concluded that selected personnel in various specialties might benefit from enhanced preparation that enabled contributions beyond traditional role limitations. particularly in complex operational environments that demanded flexibility and adaptability. Sarah's influence on military training policy continued to expand as her enhanced survival training program became a model for similar initiatives in other specialties. Medical personnel began receiving tactical training that prepared them for operations in contested environments. Intelligence specialists learned ground combat skills that enhanced their effectiveness in forward-deployed positions. Support personnel developed capabilities that allowed them to contribute directly to mission success, rather than simply maintaining equipment and logistics. The transformation of military training philosophy represented a significant departure from traditional approaches that emphasized narrow specialization over broad competencies. Sarah's experience had demonstrated that excellence in one area didn't preclude development of expertise in complementary fields, particularly when the additional training enhanced rather than detracted from primary responsibilities. 3 years after her ground combat engagement, Sarah was promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to the Naval Special Warfare Command as a liaison officer responsible for coordinating aviation support for Special Operations Forces. The assignment recognized her unique qualifications and continued the institutional evolution toward enhanced integration between aviation and ground forces. Her new duties involved developing tactical procedures that maximize the effectiveness of air-ground coordination while identifying opportunities for aircrew to contribute beyond traditional pilot roles. The work required deep understanding of both aviation capabilities and special operations requirements, knowledge that Sarah had acquired through her unconventional career path. The tactical innovations that emerged from Sarah's liaison work influenced operational planning throughout the special operations community. Her insights about aircrew capabilities led to mission designs that incorporated pilots as integral team members rather than simply providers of air support from distant positions. Master Sergeant Thompson, now serving as a senior instructor at the Special Forces Training School, regularly cited Sarah's combat performance as an example of how unexpected expertise could emerge from seemingly unlikely sources. Chen taught us that capability can exist anywhere, in anyone, if we're smart enough to recognize it and humble enough to accept help from people who don't fit our traditional expectations, he told his students. The lessons from Sarah's experience extended beyond military applications to influence how various organizations approached talent development and cross-training initiatives. Her story became a case study in adaptability, preparation, and the importance of individual initiative in complex professional environments. Companies in high-stress industries began implementing training programs inspired by Sarah's cross-training approach, recognizing that employees with diverse competencies might be better prepared to handle unexpected challenges that required skills beyond their primary job descriptions. The Enhanced Survival Training Program became a model for professional development that emphasized broad capabilities rather than narrow specialization. Emergency response organizations adopted similar training philosophies, preparing personnel to operate effectively across traditional specialty boundaries during crisis situations that demanded flexibility and adaptability. Firefighters learned medical skills, paramedics developed tactical capabilities, and police officers enhanced their emergency medical training to create response teams with overlapping competencies. The influence of Sarah's experience continued to grow as military and civilian organizations recognized the value of cross-training that prepared personnel for complex scenarios that couldn't be addressed through traditional specialization. Her story demonstrated that excellence often emerged from individuals who refused to accept conventional limitations on their potential contributions. 5 years after her ground combat engagement, Sarah was selected for promotion to commander and assigned to command a squadron of pilots who'd completed the Enhanced Survival Training Program. The assignment represented institutional recognition that her unconventional career path had prepared her for leadership responsibilities that required understanding of both aviation and ground operations. Under her command, the squadron developed innovative tactics that integrated aircrew ground capabilities with traditional aviation missions, creating operational possibilities that had been previously unimaginable. The squadron's performance during joint exercises demonstrated the tactical advantages that could be achieved when pilots possessed enhanced ground combat skills. The success of Sarah's squadron led to the establishment of additional units with similar cross-training requirements, creating a new category of aviation specialists who could operate effectively in complex environments that demanded both flying skills and ground combat capabilities. The institutional changes represented a fundamental shift in how the military approached aircrew training and employment. Rodriguez, now retired from active duty but continuing to work as a civilian contractor, remained involved in the Enhanced Survival Training Program that had grown from his initial work with Sarah. "She proved that my training philosophy could work under actual combat conditions," he reflected during a retirement ceremony. More importantly, she demonstrated that individual initiative and dedicated preparation could create capabilities that exceeded institutional expectations. The recognition of Rodriguez's contributions included establishment of a training facility that bore his name, acknowledging his role in developing cross-training methodologies that had influenced military education throughout the armed forces. Sarah participated in the dedication ceremony, crediting Rodriguez with providing the foundation for her own success and the broader institutional changes that followed. The facility became a center for innovation in military training, attracting students and instructors from around the world who sought to understand the principles that had enabled Sarah's remarkable performance. The training programs developed there continued to evolve, incorporating lessons learned from ongoing operations and technological advances that created new possibilities for cross-specialty training. Sarah's influence on military culture extended beyond training programs to affect how organizations identified and developed talent that might not fit traditional career patterns. Her experience demonstrated that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources when institutions were flexible enough to recognize and nurture unconventional capabilities. The broader implications of Sarah's story continued to resonate throughout military and civilian organizations that faced complex challenges requiring innovative approaches to talent development and capability building. Her experience became a touchstone for discussions about adaptability, preparation, and the importance of individual initiative in achieving organizational success. As Sarah continued her military career, she remained committed to the principles that had guided her unconventional preparation and extraordinary performance. She continued to seek challenges that pushed her beyond traditional expectations, understanding that expertise was a journey rather than a destination, and that the most important contributions often came from people who prepared for scenarios that others couldn't imagine. The mountains where she'd crashed her FA-18 and picked up an HK416 to fight alongside Special Forces operators had become part of military folklore, representing the kind of adaptability and cross-functional competence that modern conflicts demanded. Her story continued to inspire others who understood that true professionalism meant being ready for whatever challenges emerged, regardless of whether those challenges fit traditional job descriptions or institutional expectations. The legacy of Sarah's actions would continue to influence military thinking for generations, demonstrating that legends weren't created by conventional paths or traditional expectations, but by people who prepared themselves to exceed normal limitations when circumstances demanded exceptional performance. Her quiet professionalism and dedicated preparation had transformed her from an underestimated pilot into a respected leader whose influence extended far beyond the tactical situation that had first revealed her extraordinary capabilities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.